The clink of forks against porcelain was the only sound in the room, a brittle rhythm that filled the silence between us. My father's eyes were fixed on his plate, but I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, heavier than the roast chicken cooling in the center of the table. My mother's hands trembled as she poured water into my glass, her gaze darting between me and the empty chair at the head of the table. That chair had always been reserved for my brother, even when he wasn't home. Tonight it was empty, but his presence pressed in on us all the same. I'd barely touched my food. The mashed potatoes had gone cold, the green beans limp and forgotten. I kept waiting for someone to say something, to break the tension that had settled over us like a thick fog. But no one spoke. Not until my father set his fork down with a soft clatter and cleared his throat. "You can take the guest room," he said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "Or move out." The words landed like a slap. I stared at him, searching his face for a hint of a joke, a glimmer of the father I used to know. But his expression was unreadable, his jaw set in a hard line. My mother flinched, her knuckles white around her glass. "Dad, what are you talking about?" My voice sounded small even to me. He didn't look at me. "Your brother and his wife need your room. They'll be moving in tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of the only home I'd ever known. I glanced at my mother, hoping for some sign of protest, but she just looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. My brother's voice rang out from the hallway, cheerful and oblivious. "Better if you're gone by tomorrow, sis." He appeared in the doorway, his arm slung around his wife's shoulders. A wide grin plastered across his face. She smiled too, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe, or relief that it wasn't her being pushed out. I felt the room tilt, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, numb and silent, and pushed my chair back from the table. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling as shadows danced across the walls. My suitcase sat open on the floor, half filled with clothes and books and the pieces of a life I'd never expected to leave behind. I listened to the muffled laughter drifting down the hall, my brother and his wife settling into their new home, their new life, my life. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt like I belonged here. Maybe it was before my brother left for college, before he became the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Maybe it was before my parents started, looking at me like I was a guest in my own house, an inconvenience to be managed. Or maybe it was never, and I'd just been too blind to see it. The next morning, I packed the rest of my things in silence. My mother hovered in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't say much, just handed me a stack of clean towels and a bag of groceries, as if that could make up for everything else. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to ask her why. Why now? Why me? But I knew she wouldn't answer. She never did. My father didn't come to say goodbye. My brother helped carry my boxes to the car, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. His wife offered a half-hearted hug, her perfume clinging to my jacket long after she let go. "Good luck out there," my brother said, clapping me on the back. "You'll be fine." I drove away without looking back, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. I told myself I was free, that I could finally start over. But the truth was, I felt more lost than ever. The first week was a blur of cheap motels and takeout dinners. My belongings crammed into the trunk of my car. I called friends, hoping for a couch to crash on. But most of them were busy, their lives already full. I found a room for rent in a dingy apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neighbors kept to themselves. It wasn't home, but it was all I could afford. Panic set in on the 7th night. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, my phone buzzing with messages from my brother. He wanted to know where I'd left the spare keys, if I'd taken the charger from his old room, if I'd be coming by to pick up the mail. I ignored him, my hands shaking as I scrolled through job listings, my savings dwindling with every passing day. I thought about calling my parents, about begging them to let me come back, but pride kept me silent. I'd spent my whole life trying to make them proud, trying to be the daughter they wanted. Now I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. A week later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was frantic, her words tumbling over each other in a rush. "She's lying." "Mom! Tell me she's lying!" My brother screamed in the background. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" My mother's breath hitched. "It's your brother. Something's happened. Can you come home?" I didn't answer right away. My mind raced through every possibility: an accident, a fight, some secret finally dragged into the light. I could still hear my brother's voice, raw and desperate, echoing through the phone. For a moment, I almost hung up. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me back. I told her I'd be there soon. The drive felt longer than it should have. The city blurred past my window, the familiar streets suddenly foreign. I rehearsed what I might say, how I'd act, whether I'd even be welcome once I arrived. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I tried to remember the last time I'd come home without dread in my chest. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unchanged. Same faded shutters, same cracked walkway, same porch light flickering in the dusk. But the air felt different, charged with something I couldn't name. I stepped out, heart pounding, and walked up to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, chaos. My brother was pacing the living room. His wife perched on the edge of the couch, her face pale and drawn. My mother stood in the kitchen, wringing her hands, while my father sat at the table staring at nothing. The tension was thick enough to choke on. My brother spun around when he saw me. "Tell them you're lying," he demanded, his voice shaking. "Tell them you made it up." I blinked, confused. "Made what up?" He glared at me, eyes wild. "You know what I'm talking about. The letter. The money. The will." I looked at my parents, searching for answers. My mother's eyes darted away, guilt written plain across her face. My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. My brother's wife spoke up, her voice trembling. "We found a letter in your old room. From Grandma. It says she left something for you. Not for us. For you." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My grandmother had always been kind to me, always slipped me extra cookies when no one was looking, always remembered my birthday. But she'd passed away 2 years ago, and I'd never heard anything about a will. My brother shoved a crumpled envelope into my hands. "Read it," he spat. I unfolded the letter, my fingers shaking. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandmother's careful script, looping and elegant. She wrote about memories, about forgiveness, about family. And then, near the end, a line that made my breath catch. "To my granddaughter, I leave the house on Maple Street. I know you'll make it a home." I stared at the words, my mind spinning. The house on Maple Street. It was the old family home, the one my grandmother had lived in for decades. I'd visited every summer as a child, running through the garden, helping her bake pies in the sunlit kitchen. I hadn't been back since she died. My brother's face twisted with anger. "You knew about this. You planned it." I shook my head, stunned. "I didn't know. I swear." My father finally spoke, his voice low and tired. "We thought the will was lost. We didn't know she left the house to you." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We're sorry. We should have told you sooner." My brother wasn't listening. He was pacing again, muttering under his breath. His wife stared at the floor, silent. I sat down, the letter clutched in my hands. The house on Maple Street. It felt like a lifeline, a chance to start over, to build something of my own. But it also felt like a wedge, driving my family further apart. The next few days were a blur of arguments and accusations. My brother insisted the house should be his, that he needed it more, that I didn't deserve it. My parents tried to mediate, but every conversation ended in shouting. I stayed in my old room, the guest room now, listening to the storm rage around me. At night, I read my grandmother's letter over and over, searching for answers. She wrote about forgiveness, about letting go of old hurts, about finding your own path. I wondered if she'd known how much pain her gift would cause, or if she'd simply wanted to give me a place to belong. On the fourth day, my brother cornered me in the hallway. "You're not taking that house," he hissed. "I won't let you." I met his gaze, steady for the first time in years. "It's not up to you." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think you're better than us now? Just because Grandma liked you more?" I shook my head. "That's not what this is about." He stormed off, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, heart pounding, the letter burning in my pocket. The next morning, I packed my things and drove to Maple Street. The house was just as I remembered, white shutters, rose bushes blooming along the fence, sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of lavender and old books wrapping around me like a hug. I wandered from room to room, memories flooding back with every step. I could almost hear my grandmother's laughter, feel her arms around me, taste the sweetness of her homemade jam. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But I knew it wasn't over. My family wouldn't let this go. The storm was just beginning. I spent the first night at Maple Street, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house, the kind of sounds that used to scare me as a child, but now felt oddly comforting. I made tea in my grandmother's chipped blue mug and sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me. I tried to imagine what she'd say if she were here, probably something gentle, something wise, something about how families break and mend in ways you can't always predict. The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. I opened it to find my brother standing on the porch. His eyes rimmed red, his jaw set. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked past me into the hallway, as if searching for some proof that this was really happening. "I just want to talk," he said finally, his voice rough. I let him in. He wandered through the house, touching the banister, the old piano, the faded photographs on the wall. He stopped in the living room, staring at the sunlight slanting across the floor. "I used to think this place would be mine," he said quietly. "I always thought Grandma would leave it to me. I guess I never thought about what you wanted." I sat down on the couch, the letter still in my hand. "I didn't know either. I never asked for any of this." He turned to face me, his expression softer than I'd seen in years. "I'm sorry for how I acted, for what I said. I was angry, but it wasn't really about the house. It was about everything else. About you leaving. About how things changed." I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening just a little. "I didn't want to leave. I just didn't have a choice." He sat beside me, his shoulders slumped. "I miss how things used to be. Before all the fighting. Before we started keeping score." We sat in silence, the weight of old arguments and unspoken apologies hanging between us. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes searching. "What are you going to do with the house?" I looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the dust motes dancing in the light, the memories tucked into every corner. "I want to fix it up. Make it a place people can come to. Not just family, anyone who needs it. Grandma always said this house was meant to be full." He smiled, a real smile this time. "She'd like that." We talked for a while longer. About the past, about the future, about the things we'd both lost and the things we might still find. When he left, he hugged me, awkward but sincere. "Don't be a stranger," he said, and for the first time I believed he meant it. Over the next few weeks, I started working on the house. I painted walls, scrubbed floors, planted new roses in the garden. Neighbors stopped by to say hello, bringing stories about my grandmother, about the parties she used to throw, about the kindness she'd shown to everyone who knocked on her door. I felt her presence everywhere, in the warmth of the sun on the porch, in the laughter that echoed through the halls, in the peace that settled over me each night. My parents came by too one afternoon. My mother brought a pie, her hands shaking as she set it on the counter. My father stood in the doorway, uncertain, his eyes softening as he looked around. "We're proud of you," he said, his voice thick. We didn't say it enough. Maybe we never did. "But we are." I hugged them both, the years of hurt and misunderstanding fading, if only a little. We sat together in the kitchen, sharing pie and stories, letting the past rest for a while. Word spread about the house on Maple Street. People started coming by, old friends, distant relatives, even strangers who'd heard about the place that was open to anyone who needed a fresh start. I hosted dinners, baked bread, listened to stories. The house was full again, just like my grandmother wanted. One evening, as the sun set and laughter drifted through the open windows, I stood on the porch and watched my family, my brother, my parents, new friends gathered around the table. I realized that sometimes the things that break us are the same things that bring us back together. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward one day at a time. I looked up at the sky, the first stars appearing, and felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. I'd lost a lot, but I'd found even more. A home, a family, a place where I belonged, not because someone gave it to me, but because I chose to stay, to forgive, to build something new. And as I closed the door behind me, the house warm and bright, I knew my grandmother would be proud.